大家好，我是 Steph. Hello, welcome to my channel everybody, I'm Steph. And this was Mandarin Chinese. So when I first started this channel, I also said that I wanted to sometimes talk a little bit about languages, which is another passion of mine apart from books. And here we are. If you like these videos, make sure to give them a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button so you can get more of this content about language learning as well as my content about books and booktube and the love for reading in general. I particularly wanted to talk about Chinese, or rather Mandarin Chinese, which is the language that I'm mostly working on at the moment. And so the big question that people always ask me when I tell them this is, why am I learning Chinese? And I figured I wanted to start this little mini-series about Chinese with this question. Why are you learning Chinese? Are you planning to go to China anytime soon? And so yes, actually I am planning to go to China next year in 2019, but that actually isn't the main reason why I'm learning Chinese. I do speak some other European languages and I just wanted to have a challenge, I guess. You know, European languages are kind of similar, so if you speak some Spanish, learning Italian isn't really that big a challenge, or if you speak English, learning something like Dutch, and English and German, learning something like Dutch really isn't a challenge, really. I wanted to have this challenge of a non-European language. And I don't remember exactly how I came up with Chinese for this, though I'll be talking about it in my next video. Chinese has somehow always been a part of my life. And so Chinese just seemed like this big unknown thing that is so vastly different from anything I know from European languages. For one thing, it's a tonal language, which means that the tone in which you pronounce a word, so the main example being ma, you can have ma, 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 or ma, or ma. So these are the five main tones. There's a kind of flat tone, a rising tone, a falling tone, and an up and down and up tone, as well as a neutral tone it's called. And depending on which tone you use, the word is literally a different word. So that's obviously something that we don't really have in any other language that I'm aware of, actually. I'm not sure if there are other tonal languages as such. Another really unique thing about Chinese obviously is the characters, so that actually it's a pictographic language. Each word is made up of pictures, if you will. They might not always resemble the original meaning of the word, but it's definitely very different from languages that are based on alphabets, such as pretty much most other languages I know. And other really interesting things are that Chinese doesn't, like the grammar in Chinese is very, very different from European grammar. So for example, while in languages like Spanish or French and a little bit in English and German, you have very clear tenses. So when you say, I will go shopping, not so much in English, but in Spanish, for example, it will be very clear that the word for will go shopping is in the future tense. Or if you say, I moved somewhere in the past, I moved in English, that word by itself indicates that it is in the past tense. Whereas in Chinese, you don't really have that. You don't change the actual word for these things, but instead use little context words, I would say, little words that denote that you are now speaking about the future, or you are now speaking about the past tense. And that just kind of makes the language so fascinating because it's so different, I guess. And another thing that I find really interesting in Chinese is that it uses measure words, which is something that I'd never come across in any other language. So the only way that I know of how to compare this is that there are some kind of measure words in English that we don't really think of as measure words, and we don't really need them as much as Chinese needs them. So for example, you might say, I'm drinking a cup of tea. And so cup in this context would be the measure word for the tea. Or you might say, I'm buying a bottle of milk. And again, the bottle would be the measure word. However, in Chinese, it's not just the case for these things where you could just leave it out. You could say, I'm buying milk and I'm drinking tea. You don't need to specify that it's a bottle of milk or a cup of tea. But in Chinese, you actually need to specify this with every single noun, with every single object. And there are some really, really amusing and kind of cute little measure words that I find utterly hilarious, not hilarious, like that I find really, really fascinating. So for example, the one for tomato is a measure word that is used for small spherical objects, which, yeah, I guess that's what a tomato is, but you kind of just never think of, oh, I need to, you know, say this as a small spherical object, tomato. Or you might have one for long, thin objects such as pencils or fish I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not sure if fish really are long, thin objects, but apparently in Chinese they are. And so with all these things that are so vastly different from any other European languages, I think it really expands your thinking. So for example, this whole business with measure words really expands how you think about words. Literally just, what is a word? Why is it okay for us to say I'm eating an apple without having to specify that the apple you're talking about is a round object? Or, I don't know. Measure words are they're still blowing my mind sometimes. And I think that's one thing that I love about learning Chinese, that it's also really making me question how English works and how other languages that I know work, because there is nothing comparable to a lot of these things in Chinese. And another thing I really love about Chinese is that writing the characters, actually physically by hand, writing them out, making sure that the stroke order is right, because you need to make, that dot before this line and going from top to bottom and things like that, is actually very meditative and quite relaxing, unless you're rushing to finish writing something. But actually sitting down and writing characters is really, it's an art almost. It's not, I guess obviously I learned writing Latin letters when I was, I don't know, 5 or 6. And so it's always been kind of, oh well, you just jot something down. But in Chinese it feels much more, yeah, like an art, like a kind of slowly making sure that I do the stroke order correctly. And I don't know, I just really, really enjoy writing this. And I don't even just mean with proper ink and brush, but also just with my pens. Obviously writing with proper Chinese ink and a Chinese brush, like actual Chinese calligraphy, is so nice. And I unfortunately don't get a lot of chances to do that. But whenever I do, it is absolutely amazing. But even just writing normal everyday things, I really, really enjoy. All right, I am rambling about writing Chinese here. And so yes, I think the main reason for learning any language really is being able to communicate with people who speak this language. And obviously, as we know, China is the largest country in the world in terms of population. And I forget what it is exactly, something like 1 in 5 people in the world are Chinese. And obviously, learning to speak the language that everybody in China learns in school, not everybody in China speaks Putonghua, which is the Mandarin dialect, but I think everybody pretty much learns it in school nowadays. And so that's just amazing to be able to communicate potentially with 1/5 of the world's population. I find really, really motivating to learn this language. And lastly, yes, obviously, I am planning to go to China. So hopefully knowing a little bit of Mandarin and maybe being able to have little conversations with people while I'm there sounds so nice. And just getting this insight into this culture and country and language that is so different from anything I know in Europe, I'm really, really excited about. So yeah, that's the main answer that I would give to why I'm learning Chinese. In the next video, I'll be talking about my journey with Chinese so far, because actually I realized that while it's only been about a year or so that I've been intensely learning Chinese, this language has kind of been around my life literally from as far as I can remember. I think I learned my first Chinese characters when I was around 8 years old. And so I wanted to kind of tell you the story of how it went from my first characters at 8 to now actually being able to hold a conversation with someone in Chinese for an hour on Skype and vaguely understanding what the other person is saying. All right, 再见! Until next time, bye bye!